everybody. It's Thanksgiving Eve. I hope you're all having good plans for Thanksgiving, whether you're traveling or cooking turkeys at home. We've had a magical fall, haven't we, up to this point? Just a magical fall. But the progress report doesn't stop just because the weather's good, and we have many important things coming up. Tonight, I'm so pleased to be able to say we're going to do a show. Not the first by any means, as Mike reminded me when I told him what I was thinking of for tonight. We're going to do a show about the status of energy policy in New Hampshire, which is a particular hobby horse of mine, having served, 8 years in the legislature, all of them with the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, the last two as chairman. And right now, I think our energy policy in the state of New Hampshire is in a terrible state. And we couldn't have a better person to discuss this with as Sam Evans-Brown. Now, that name may be a little bit familiar to you, as it was to me, because Sam Evans-Brown had a long and distinguished career as a feature reporter, and I guess just a reporter, but, did a lot of feature stories for NHPR. And it was very interesting to me that where he went after leaving that very distinguished employer was to the premier, I think, advocacy organization for good energy policy in New Hampshire, which is now called Clean Energy New Hampshire. It's had distinguished leadership going back to when it was the New Hampshire Sustainable Energy Association, headed by the wonderful Kate Epsom, and then the excellent Madeline Minot. I know these names don't mean much to you, but I have to mention them because I admire these people. And then, we found out that the new director was going to be, whoops, to my surprise, NHPR reporter and I think real good public advocate, Sam Evans-Brown. So, Sam, thank you for joining us. We're so happy. We wish you could be here. We know why it isn't the case that you're here, but we're glad, and we want to wish the best to your family for Thanksgiving. And, I always like to start off. I've given a little introduction about what I know about you, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how it came to be that you transitioned from being a reporter to being an advocate for clean energy?
Absolutely. So I'm a New Hampshire boy. I grew up in the bustling metropolis of Gilmanton Iron Works, which, for those who don't know, is a sort of Southern Lakes region town.
Not to be confused with Gilmanton.
No, very different communities, Gilmanton and Gilmanton Iron Works, as any Iron Works resident will tell you. And I really never left. My wife and I, we met at Bates College in Maine, and then very promptly after graduating from undergraduate, found good jobs in our home state. And we sort of ruefully talked about this for a little while at that phase in our lives, that, here we are in our early 20s and we've settled right back down where we started. But now as
Sam, the volume on what we're getting from you is pretty low, and I'm trying very hard to. So you and your wife are both New Hampshire natives. Is that what you were saying?
That's right. Here, if you want, I can try unplugging these headphones. We'll see if it's.
It's not you, Sam. It's that we're listening to a 1967 transistor radio as our monitor here in the studio. But we're going to manage. We're going to do this.
We're going to do it, Sam.
Can you tell me, is this better now or is this worse?
No, it's fine. It's fine. We can do it. We're going to deal with what we have to deal with, Sam. It's the story that's important.
So continue, please. I'm enjoying what you're saying.
Yeah, so we were both New Hampshire natives. My wife grew up in Moulton Borough, which is where I am right now. I'm at the in-laws' house for Thanksgiving. And then we settled back down in New Hampshire really, really shortly after college, and we were both counted ourselves very lucky. My wife's a teacher, and she got a job as a full-time educator, and I got a job with New Hampshire Public Radio, which I hung out at for 10 years, which is funny because prior to my job at New Hampshire Public Radio, I hadn't kept any previous job for longer than 3 months. So quite a transition from seasonal labor to a full-time reporting gig. And really, the reason I left NHPR to come to Clean Energy New Hampshire is that, I settled in. First, I was a general assignment reporter, and then an education reporter, and then finally, I was put onto the environment beat. And the more I learned about climate change, the more I realized that the climate story is really an energy story, that energy policy is climate policy, and that energy policy is infinitely fascinating, and that you can spend an entire lifetime learning about it and not have learned everything you need to know.
Bob's done that, by the way.
And I'm sure Bob doesn't know everything he needs to know.
Sam, I gotta interrupt here. You know, I'm a pretty old dude. I've been around a long time, and I hope it to be around quite a bit longer. But I remember as a kid, I had an aunt and uncle lived up in Wolfboro, and I remember going up to Wolfboro to spend Thanksgiving with them, and we skated on Lake Winnipesaukee on Wolfboro Day on Thanksgiving Day. That's true. I'm not making that up. It's amazing when you talk about climate change. I mean, what we've seen in you know, my longer lifespan by far than yours, but you know, it's really absolutely amazing.
Yeah, Bob's talking about the Ice Age, Sam. Yeah. Everybody skated on Winnipesaukee back then.
In any event,
I'm sorry, Bob. It's a serious topic.
Well, no,
but I mean, you teed that one up for me.
You know, it fits very well. This is what this guy does for me, you know. Sam, so how did you come to be the CEO, the executive director of Clean Energy New Hampshire? I mean, it was a surprise to me that that's who they picked. I'm not unhappy about it, but I was surprised. So can you tell us about that?
You know, I think I managed to con the board into believing that really the last remaining problem when it comes to the transition to a clean energy economy is that of communications. You know,
good point.
I'm oversimplifying here, but I genuinely have come to believe over the course of 10 years of reporting on this that we will be better off in almost every imaginable way if we quit hemming and hawing and we pull the trigger and we go whole hog into transitioning to an economy that centers renewable energy and local distributed generation, and does away with the old paradigm of great big centralized fossil fuel stations. We'll have better health, we'll have a stronger economy, and we'll be more resilient to these natural disasters that are occurring with more and more frequency. And so that became something that I totally convinced of as a reporter, having again spent 10 years reviewing the evidence. And it seemed to me that it was no longer a technical challenge, but really a communications challenge, that we just needed to bring the good news to the folks who hadn't heard the good news, that in fact these technologies have become so much cheaper that you will save money by transitioning to them.
But Sam, let me jump in, Bob.
Go ahead, please.
I want to jump in on this because just today, and here's the conflict between the technology, the message. I've already bought into it, so you know what I mean. You're going to be speaking to other people who haven't yet bought into the idea that we can have a difference in how our environment's going to look in the future and the life we're going to lead. But just today, we have a president who is clearly a new energy president, who is promoting it with every policy he's putting forward. Open up the strategic oil reserve so we could have cheaper gas. You know what I mean? And by the same token, if I were to buy a Prius today, I would have to plug it into a coal plant to get it to run. So
well, okay, I'm going to push back on you right there, which is that to say,
please do. That's why I come here to learn things.
The New England grid is one of the cleaner grids in the country, right? And so you can go online right now, you can Google it, and you can just you know, there are so many people who have devoted themselves to dispelling that particular talking point that you rolled out here. And you can see that there's a vanishingly small number of counties in the United States where driving with an electric car today produces more emissions than an internal combustion vehicle.
That's good news to me, and I'm glad to hear it. I'm very glad to hear it, and I will never make that argument again. By the way, I'm playing devil's advocate. This is not something I feel from my heart. I'm playing a role here. Bear with me.
Really, it's only sort of like Utah and parts of the Midwest and sort of like North Dakota, the places that are some of the more most coal-heavy grids in the country, that it's still more emissions to drive an electric vehicle than an internal combustion vehicle. And here in New England, depending on how you count the emissions, there's already a substantial portion of the grid that's producing zero emissions, largely because of the 2 remaining nuclear-fired plants. But then also we have a growing portion of the grid that's coming from renewables, now above 10%, and that, by the way, is only the renewables that are so-called front of the meter. So when you install solar panels on your house, and you have them feeding back into the grid whenever you're using less than you're generating, that's what's called behind the meter. And so behind the meter solar isn't even being counted in that 10% number. And when you look at New England wide how much behind the meter solar there is, there's almost 2 gigawatts installed, which is double what the Seabrook nuclear power plant is. And so the grid is getting cleaned up a lot faster than a lot of people realize. And these technologies are maturing much more quickly than anyone ever predicted. There's a hilarious graph. So the International Energy Agency, which is an organization that's one of the most respected and renowned forecasters of where we're headed on our sort of our energy trajectory. There's a graph that you can see where they have forecast the cost declines of solar energy, and every time they get it wrong, they under forecast how cheap solar is going to get, and then a few years later they have to come back and they have to drop their assumptions. And when you look at how fast and how cheap these technologies have gotten, it's really remarkable. And that is the story that is not being told.
That is great news that I had not been hearing, and I'm happy to hear it.
That is terrific news, but let me put a little asterisk on that. I remember in the legislature, and we've seen it, I guess not just here in New Hampshire, but lots of other places, including overseas, tremendous pushback against some forms of renewable energy, like wind turbines being, placed on the ridge lines because they can be up where the wind is best. I think, the attempt to cite wind turbines to generate electricity, which are non-emitting, obviously. If you're getting your fuel from the wind, you're getting your power from the wind, it's fuel-free, it's emission-free. So it's all good, but there's a tremendous pushback on that, and I think to some degree also for solar. So it's wonderful to hear these advances, but there's pushback, is there not?
That is all true, and I'm not here to minimize any of that. What I will say though is I think that we're taking our baby steps here towards this transition, and if you can imagine 100 years ago when they started to throw up power lines and string throw up the utility poles and string power lines in between them, I'm sure that there was pushback to that as well. So I think that to a certain extent, we may be at the apex of the social pushback to seeing these new types of infrastructure put in. I am optimistic because I think that constitutionally I am an optimist and I struggle to be a pessimist. But I am optimistic that as people start to get more familiar with all of this, the pushback will decline. That said, it will never disappear, right? I mean, there are people who push back when their neighbors like they cut down a tree to bring in a little more light for their lawn. There are people who push back when their neighbors build an addition on their house. So I think the resistance to change is natural, and is something that we will always have to manage. But that said, I honestly think that we may be at the point where that pushback is strongest right now. And when we look back 30 years from now, it might seem a little quaint.
So, Sam, now I'd like you talk a little bit about yourself, which I found very interesting, and thank you for doing that. I'd like you to talk a little bit about Clean Energy New Hampshire, which I think has become, you probably won't disagree with this, the premier advocacy organization for good energy policies for New Hampshire. And we're awfully glad you're there, and it seems like the thing is scaled up enormously. So can you talk a little bit about Clean Energy New Hampshire, what its mission is, what its role is, and how you see advancing the goals that we want to have gain strength?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certainly not going to disagree with you that it's the premier energy advocacy organization.
We throw out a lot of softballs here, Sam. So you maybe come back and join us again.
No, so it's funny because I've had to learn ever more about the organization since in the 5 short months that I've been at the helm. But what I can tell you is, in the sort of speed dating course that I've taken here in the past 5 months, is that it's an organization that started as the New Hampshire Sustainable Energy Association, and it was really focused on homeowners. There were a lot. It was largely what they did is they did sort of open houses for energy efficient homes and homes that had renewable energy installed on the premises, as a way to just expand awareness that these technologies existed and that you could do this. And it wasn't until the after 2010 when two very sort of entrepreneurial young folks, Clay Mitchell and Kate Epson, were put on the board, that they started to look for funding to more or less professionalize the organization. And that's what they did. They found funding. Kate was hired as the first executive director, and she made it her goal to try to influence state policy. And so instead of focusing on local action and homeowners, she spent most of her time focusing on state policy in the Public Utilities Commission and at the New Hampshire legislature. And that, I think, really set the course for the organization, because Clean Energy New Hampshire, when I was a reporter, I knew them as, NESE, as it was called at the time, New Hampshire Sustainable Energy Association. I knew Kate as the person that I could call to get no BS answers on what the heck was happening on New Hampshire energy policy. And she was always a straight shooter. She always told me exactly what was going on, and she was willing to admit when her side had weaknesses in their arguments. And I think that that's something that I'd like to that's the pedigree that Clean Energy New Hampshire is going to continue to lean into. It is true that the energy transition is not going to be easy, and there are going to be a lot of hurdles that we have to clear. But what we need are advocates who deeply understand the issues, are engaged in the fora in which the decisions are actually being made. So the PUC and the legislature. But then also the thing that I would like to really grow when I here at Clean Energy New Hampshire is being the sort of convener for all of the various folks who are working on these issues in their local communities, and just need sort of a central place to organize around a few central issues that would be really transformational at the state level. And so what I'm hoping to grow at Clean Energy New Hampshire, we have something called a circuit rider. So Melissa Alander is up in the North Country. She's our North Country circuit rider, and she. It warms my heart every time I see Melissa's projects. She is helping communities apply for New Hampshire Saves fundings to insulate their firehouses and spray foam the basements of their town halls. And she's helping apply to USDA rural development grants to put solar on the roofs of libraries. And in so doing, Melissa is also connecting with all sorts of local folks who want to take local action. And then when we need them for statewide actions, we can reach out to those local communities. Yeah. And so what I'm hoping to do is sort of clone Melissa and have many circuit riders all around the state that are those sort of conveners for folks who want to take action.
Sounds like a very effective public outreach and organizing program. Very personal, very hands-on, very one-on-one.
That's the hope.
Indeed, it is, and we're going to get into the unhappy state of New Hampshire state energy policy, because that's a big part of why we wanted you here, Sam. But you're absolutely right. I think that if the state won't do the job, and right now I don't think it is doing the job of advancing clean energy, let's deal with the municipalities, our cities and towns. And a lot of the action is there. I mean, if the state's not going to up our energy efficiency goals, our renewable goals, let's have our cities and towns do it. And I guess clean energy is up to supporting that effort. Is that right?
I couldn't agree more. And the other newly formed on October the 1st, the other brand new organization that I like to point out in this regard is the Community Power Coalition. So 2019, there was a law passed that allowed communities to become the default energy providers for their residents. So you can become, what's called a load-serving entity. That's to say, you are the electricity provider of last resort in your community. And so this what is a nonprofit, it's called a Joint Power Agency, incorporated on October the 1st, and they're going to start making the decisions of where the 12 founding communities, which include all sorts of folks up in the Upper Valley, but also towns sprinkled all over the state, including Nashua, one of the second biggest population center in the state. They're going to start deciding where those towns get their electricity, and everyone in their town will be included on an opt-out basis. And a lot of those towns have zero emissions pledges. They're trying to bring their town in alignment with international emissions treaties, and that has the potential to be absolutely transformational, not just in terms of the state's emissions, but also in terms of the political power that coalition can bring to bear at the State House whenever some of these questions are being considered.
Sam, I don't think we told you this, but we typically take a couple of breaks in this show, mostly so we can kind of check in and make sure we're going where you would like to go with us. And I think we're going to probably do that now because there's an awful lot you've raised here that I want to pursue further. But I think we'll just take a very quick... By the way, folks, this is a live show. You can call in and join us. You have to dial a 603 now. I occasionally forget that, right?
603-640-3091.
Do you remember the big fight when they're going to break us into two separate area codes? It was a whole hell of a lot. We now you have to dial 10 numbers. Nobody said a goddamn thing about it.
Bob,
I don't
language.
understand.
Holy cow! This is a primetime program here. We got kids listening.
We hope we have kids listening. So please join us, 603-640-3091. We'd love to hear your participation. We have a genuine advocacy leader and an expert in Sam Evans-Brown, after a long career in communications as a NHPR reporter and now the chief executive of Clean Energy New Hampshire, our premier advocacy organization for better energy policies for this state, with us. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back, folks. Hey folks, this is the progress report for this Wednesday. I believe it is the last Wednesday of November. Tomorrow
It is. Next Wednesday is December 1st.
Turkey Day, so you won't be here next week.
I will not.
And we are having an interesting, I hope you agree, discussion with Sam Evans-Brown, who was transitioned from being an NHPR reporter and feature editor to the executive director of Clean Energy New Hampshire, the premier advocacy organization for helping New Hampshire to get to the energy future we all want to be part of. Lower emissions of carbon and other climate damaging gases, lower costs, it's not going to be more costly, and transitioning to fuels, non-fuels that can power our energy services that we need, starting with the favorite of them all for most of us, energy efficiency. And
I have a few questions I want to ask about that when we get around to the...
Well, go right ahead.
Well, okay, before we get to policy, and I don't mean to sound facetious, Sam, but we talked a lot about prices going down. That is great news, because always the problem was you needed some sort of a government subsidy to get people to put these things on their roofs and all of that, and even on wind power. Okay, so the price goes down. We get to the point where now we have an energy grid that has a good solid component of wind turbines at locations that are acceptable, and solar arrays, in addition to the ones that people have on their houses. And now the sun is free and the wind is free. So once we've paid for the solar array and once we've paid for the wind turbine, will our energy bills go down to close to free? Whereas all we're paying for is the transmission charge over the wires, because the fuel is going to be free. Am I wrong? Where's the fault in my logic?
Yeah, so the fault in your logic is that the fuel is free, but these are more capital intensive projects, right? So just think of the offshore wind farm, Vineyard Wind, that was just approved. That's it's an 800 megawatt array, and that project is going to cost close to $3 billion to install.
By the way,
right?
just for our viewers, 800 megawatts is about 3/4 of the size of the Seabrook nuke.
Right. So it's a big plant, but also if you were to compare it to building a similarly big plant that was fossil fueled, it's going to cost much more capital to put it up in the first place. Now, of course, the fuel cost is zero, right? And so when you compare it over the lifespan of that project, it compares quite favorably. And in fact, Massachusetts, the power purchase agreement that they signed with Vineyard Wind actually will save Massachusetts residents money as a result of that project going in. But the fuel being free doesn't mean that the energy is free, right? It just means you're paying for it all up front, which then, of course, means that you're paying for sort of debt, right? Because they have to get a big fat loan in order to be able to.
Right,
to
but
build
once I pull that last coupon out of my payment book, I can drive that car from now on without writing a check to the bank, right?
Yeah, but you're not wrong though that renewable energy has a depressive effect on especially wholesale power prices, and that is something that you'll find. The New England Power Generators Association, which is an organization that represents all of the centralized fossil fueled and nuclear fired plants, they complain about this all the time. That they say that these renewable power projects are breaking the markets. They're harming price discovery, and really all they're saying is that they can generate power for zero marginal cost, which makes it harder to be a fossil fuel plant. So I do not think it is wrong that we will have cheaper power bills in a clean energy future. And in particular, when you start to look at your entire energy bill, right? So not just your electricity bill, but let's imagine you start to roll other costs that you're paying right now into your electricity bill. Already, the total cost of ownership for an electric car is cheaper than that of a fossil fuel car. And the reason for that is that obviously the electricity is cheaper per mile for the actual driving, but also you're saving. You don't have to do oil changes. There are just fewer moving parts generally, and so they have a lower maintenance cost. And so generally speaking, as we start to head into this future, you're going to be paying less for everything you're paying for now.
I just have to say, Sam, I just got back from taking a trip on Amtrak to Georgia, came back, had a nice visit with my daughter and her husband, and they live in Vienna, Virginia, and they picked me up at this train station in a brand new Tesla. A brand new Tesla. They had to wait 4 months to get it, but they got it, and it was driven to their door with the plates on and everything ready, and the trade-in driven away, and it was a beautiful car. And my daughter says, "We'll never have to go to a gas station again."
Yeah,
and that's
one of these. Just like a little rant here. Everyone's always worried about being able to charge your car publicly. Data from folks who have an electric car now show that 80% of your charging is at home. Just imagine if you never left the house without a full tank of gas. How often would you have to stop at a gas station if that was the case? And so really those public fast charging stations that you hear about, they're like a safety blanket for when you go on a road trip or when you take, when you go to be a tourist somewhere. Otherwise, you're never stopping at a gas station again. And the people who own electric cars, I don't own one yet. Hope to someday soon.
Yeah.
But the people who do, who I talk to, they say it's just a huge improvement in the quality of their life because they don't have to worry about it anymore, except for occasionally when they're on a road trip.
Plus all the savings you've already mentioned on lower maintenance costs and all sorts of things. But Sam, now I just can't resist turning to the thing that really gets me going, and not in a good way, and probably you too, and that is the state of energy policy in the state of New Hampshire. I mean, we've just, it's always driven me nuts, and it's been true since my time in the legislature, that New Hampshire is sort of in the middle of the country in terms of its getting, renewable and energy efficiency going, sort of in the middle, but dead last in New England. Dead last in New England. We used to be, could look at Maine as kind of a laggard, but, they elected a different governor and things have changed there dramatically. And why is that? Why is New Hampshire falling so far behind? You've got great ideas of how we can overcome this, deal with your local community, your local municipality. But why is New Hampshire?
I know the answer. I want to hear what Sam says, but I know the answer.
Falling behind everybody else in New England. And I know you're gonna work on this. You've asked the key question, and this is something that I say to anyone who will listen to me, that I believe that it is that the transition to a clean energy economy is no longer a technological problem, that the remaining technological questions that have to be answered, by the time that they become a serious problem, we will have answered them, right? So we can get 80% of the way there with the technologies that we have, and we'll figure out the last 20% in 2040, 2050 once we get that far. Yep.
And so the problem that remains is a political one. And I think New Hampshire, I was a poli-sci major, and what I took from my schooling is to see things through an institutional lens. And that's I think simultaneously clarifying, but also a little bit frightening, because it's really hard to change institutional design. But when you have a legislature that has 400 reps for a state as small as ours, and they're volunteer reps, and they're elected every 2 years, it just means you have a constant cycle of folks who are almost universally older, because they have to have the spare time and the disposable income in order to be able to serve, and they also don't necessarily have to do a ton of research into the things that they're going to be voting on, because again, New Hampshire, you're able to bring any bill forward that you want, and every bill gets a hearing and every bill gets a vote.
Yep.
So it's just an enormous education problem, and I would also argue that the demographics of the New Hampshire legislature mean that it is an institution that's going to be resistant to change no matter what, because it's folks who they've lived their whole lives, and they're not really sure that there is a need for.
Sam, I'm not entirely buying that. New Hampshire was the first place to enact, for example, workman's compensation legislation. We had a big legislature then, a volunteer legislature. I'm not sure those are the things.
Same-sex marriage.
Huh?
Same-sex marriage by a legislature.
We were the first state to do same-sex marriage without a court order. I mean, we can go on and on. So I'm not buying your analysis on this. I think there must be something more going on to explain why we don't seem to be willing to take what everybody now thinks. It's amazing to me. I fought the Seabrook Dragon for decades, Sam. You may not know this, but that was my only $1 billion case as a lawyer was Seabrook, and I represent a side that didn't have the billions too. But it just sticks in my craw to look at where we are in New Hampshire compared with always lagging behind.
Can I put my 2 cents in on this question?
Sure.
And Arnie Arneson came on the show via Skype last week, and we talked a little bit about this. It's because it's the political will. I think you're absolutely right, pointing to the political aspect of why we can't have good policy, but it's the political will. if you don't elect people who want good energy policy, you will not get good energy policy. And that's what has been happening.
Well, they elect people in Massachusetts and Vermont and Connecticut. Why don't we
Yeah.
elect these people?
Yeah,
Because we have a
mean,
free
I-
state project that our governor has
Okay,
embraced.
so now I would actually tend to agree with you here that I think this was actually the next thing I was going to say is that so there's the institutional design question, and then there's the historical accident question. And here the historical accident is that just by pure chance, some Dartmouth professor,
who's now at St. Anselm's, my alma mater, to my utter shame.
When I forget when it was that the founding document was written, but 20, 30 years ago, decided that New Hampshire was the state that libertarians were going to make a concerted effort to take over the government. And anyone who's in the New Hampshire State House will tell you is that the New Hampshire Freedom Caucus has dramatically changed New Hampshire politics.
No question.
And so that is true. That is real. And I'm perhaps Pollyanna about this, but I do think that there might be an opportunity to speak to those folks in their own language, because if you really are concerned about electricity costs in New Hampshire, you can't ignore the fact that the utility business model that relies on them being sort of a monopoly that gets paid for building more and more stuff, and therefore has an incentive to build more and more stuff, is the main reason why New England has higher transmission costs than anywhere else in the country, right? And so there are certain messages that I think have the potential to land with the libertarian set, and those are I think messages that I'm excited to try out.
Yeah. So.
Have you had any results in your efforts, or are you still working on the flashcards?
Clean Energy New Hampshire is a bipartisan organization. We have Republicans on the board, and when I talk to them about those very issues, it works with the folks who are on our board. However, obviously preaching to the choir a little bit, because those are Republicans who are already converted to the idea that clean energy is the way to go. But I am genuinely optimistic to get in front of some how would I characterize some audiences that are unlikely to agree with me. And so, I'm speaking to the BIA's Energy Forum for 2 days next month. I've considered trying to reserve a spot up at the Pork Fest over the summer, and I'm going to give it a whirl.
Well, good for you. We support your efforts.
I'm certainly glad you're going to be there. I've been to many of those, and I'm certainly glad you're going to be there.
You've been to Pork Fest?
No, the BIA Energy. I haven't been to Pork Fest. I've been to the BIA Energy.
I'm sorry, Bob. I'm a little checked out. I've got turkey on the mind.
Turkey. You had pork on the mind. What are you talking about? Well, that's great to hear. I hope that things can be turned around for New Hampshire at the state level, but I'm pretty concerned about it.
Bob, what
obviously.
about the PUC? Now, what shocked me in talking with Arnie about this, I can understand. Yeah, we got politics in the legislature, and it's a little weird these days. But the Public Utilities Commission is supposed to be a very stable rudder that works within very strict restrictions. And what we see is they've basically gutted the low-hanging fruit. With getting rid of the energy efficiency credits.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to go to next, and it may be time to take our next break.
All right, we can lead off.
And
the next
we'll
segment
lead with that for you, Sam, because I believe you have an advocacy approach, an aggressive approach to deal with this. I think I can just say it. It's a disastrous order like nothing I've ever seen in my career. And we'll be back in just a minute, folks. And again, please call us. We'd love to hear from you. You may be concerned about your electric bills. You may be concerned about the effect of our energy system on climate. Whatever it is, we'd love to hear from you. 603-640-3091. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back. This is the progress report for this Thanksgiving Eve, Wednesday, November 24th. And because it's a hobby horse of mine, of course, but I think it should be of interest to, I hope, many of our viewers and our citizens generally. We are talking again about the state of energy policy in New Hampshire. We have reached a status in this country where, for many, many reasons, most Americans think we need to do something about transitioning to a clean energy economy. Oh, we have a call.
Yeah.
That's even good.
We love our callers.
Hey, caller, welcome to the Progress Report. Please chip right in.
Yeah, I'm glad I tuned in. I'm an electrician,
Yep.
and maybe over a 40-year career in the field, and I've been at it for a total of 50 years.
Oh my.
I've lost track about how many amps I put in and where, in industry and
Yep.
commercial and the whole bit. And what I'm not understanding is how people do not understand that the power has to come from someplace.
Right.
Okay? Everybody wants the lights to come on. Everybody wants a cell phone, but nobody wants a power plant, and nobody wants a cell phone tower. It just does not compute. And the other thing I have to editorialize on, the cost of generating electricity could be greatly reduced if we tapped into some water power. The people up in Quebec are really smart. They don't cut a sluice way to get more water, to get over the falls, until such times they got a customer for it. But you see, we're not paying $100 a barrel, for water. Okay, once that is established, the fuel is free. All right, thanks for letting me vent. Appreciate it.
Thanks for the call.
I very much
informative call.
appreciate your call, and I'm going to let our guest talk about this. You're talking about the proposal we had to import massive amounts of Canadian, Quebec-based hydropower from Hydro-Quebec, which is a government-owned entity, and they have developed an enormous resource up there of hydro, which is what you're talking about. We had a very contentious process in New Hampshire, which ended up with a site evaluation committee, which is our statewide siting committee for energy process, turning it down. And now the fight's gone on to Quebec, to Maine, and they've had a referendum which voted against the project, and now it's in the hands of the court of the state of Maine whether that vote will count or will not. And I don't know, Sam. Hydropower is renewable. It's non-emitting in most people's imaginations. It's not like burning fossil fuels. There's some serious environmental impacts apparently being felt in Quebec, but they're already incurred in the changing of the course of rivers and creating huge dams and all of that. And the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, put out a requirement for achieving a tremendous amount of their energy needs through renewable energies, and a key part of that is having access to this Hydro-Quebec power. We passed on that in New Hampshire because of the decision of the Site Evaluation Committee. But does a Clean Energy New Hampshire have a position on that as to whether this power line should go through the state of Maine or whether the referendum should prevail?
We have so far generally avoided taking positions on things that are incredibly controversial that we don't have to take positions on. For instance, the construction of power lines in neighboring states. And I believe, I would have to go back in time. Bob, you actually might have a better memory of this than me. I believe that they even tried my predecessors tried to avoid this question in New Hampshire as well. I don't think that Clean Energy New Hampshire had a strong position for or against Northern Pass. But I have a lot of opinions on this, so we can talk about them as much as you'd like. So one of the features that you mentioned, I'm sort of a feature reporter, and what I would say is I got to launch a show called Outside In, that rather than doing 4.5-minute stories, I got to do 45-minute stories on issues. And one of the stories that I got to do is I went up to I visited both the hydropower complexes on the north shore of the St. Lawrence River and up on the James Bay. So that's in the territory of the Innu people and the Cree people. And I talked to the local communities there about living alongside that hydropower. And I would say that I came away with a pretty nuanced perspective on Hydro-Quebec. And generally speaking, what I'd say is that it is a company that, as you mentioned, is publicly owned, and it has been part of sort of the mission of empowering the French Canadian people for more than 70 years now. Because if you look back to the 1950s, being French Canadian was, you were sort of a minority group. And when French Canadian government took power in Quebec, they used hydropower as their way of generating jobs for French Canadian folks. And it was often at the expense of the indigenous people and their outstanding claims that of the damages to the people who lived on that territory and had their land flooded without any having been compensated or having given permission. And it led to massive court battles up in Quebec that resulted in frankly in huge strides and some incredibly remarkable agreements between the Cree and the Canadian government are now seen as sort of the gold standard for how you should treat your Indigenous people. So all that is to say that it's a very complicated story up in Quebec. Indeed, if you were to connect New England to that resource, it would lower power prices here in the Northeast. It would certainly make it easier to transition to a renewable energy future. At the same time, all of the local renewable projects that we're trying to get built would have to compete with that incredibly cheap Canadian hydro that is fully depreciated, and dams that were built, some of them over 100 years ago, and so it would also have a depressive effect on the construction of local renewables. So it's a complicated story. I'm thankful that Clean Energy New Hampshire doesn't have to weigh in on an active proposal in the Granite State right now, because as you saw with the Northern Pass fight, it's a very polarizing question. And the full story, Bob, that I don't think you quite mentioned, is that the state of Maine just had a plebiscite. Had a referendum in which the populace overwhelmingly rejected the Maine power line as well. So you mentioned that renewable energy projects are hard to get built. Really, any infrastructure project in the Northeast, in New England in particular, is incredibly hard to get built. And power lines of that scale are exceptionally difficult to get permitted. And so the thing that I would say is that, generally speaking, that is sort of a feature. It's a perk of local distributed resources. Is it's pretty easy to slap solar panels on your roof. You're not going to hit tons of permitting hassles, and that's why there's 2 gigawatts of behind the meter solar here in New England.
Which, well said there, Sam.
No NIMBY problem if it's on my roof, right? They can't say anything about it.
That's right. That's exactly right, Mike. And, to our caller, as we've been pointing out, the issue has really switched from New Hampshire to Maine. New Hampshire said no. The decision in Maine is now in the hands of Maine courts. But where was I going to go with that? For us in New Hampshire, I know where I wanted to go. I wanted to go where I always want to go. The number one energy answer we have, and I know Clean Energy cares about this a lot, is to get our energy services we need, whether it's cold beer or hot showers or whatever, charging for our electric cars, to get those services by using less kilowatts. That's what we want.
Energy efficiency.
Energy efficiency. What Amory Lovins, in one of his most felicitous things he ever did, called negawatts, not megawatts.
That's a good word.
Megawatts are expensive. Look at the Seabrook fiasco. Look at Hydro-Quebec. That was expensive.
But the energy you don't use is
the energy you don't use, as long as you're still getting what you want. Nobody wants to eat energy. Nobody wants it on their toast. It doesn't work. But we want what it can provide to us. And if we can get what it can provide with using less kilowatts, i.e. negawatts, that's what we want. And that's why, Sam, you and I hope a whole lot of people around this state are outraged by the PUC decision to reject the planned renewal and advancement of our energy efficiency resource standard, which for the first time, instead of saying, they used to say, well, we'll give this many dollars and we'll see how much energy efficiency we can buy with these number of dollars. Some comes from electric consumers, which is the big hub here. But now we have with the energy efficiency resource standard, which says, You will make these goals for energy efficiency, and we will provide the dollars to see that you can make them. Because, Sam, why is this not economically a good idea?
All right, so you've laid quite a lot of it out already. You've stolen a bit of my thunder here to explain what an energy efficiency resource standard is. But
Please do, Sam,
add
please
a
do,
little-
because I didn't quite get it from the way Bob told it to me. So I'm hoping you can help me out.
We need a good community. We got a good community here in Sam Evans
So the
Brown.
way I try to explain this is that basically you've got two options when you're looking at planning long term for your electricity demand. You can either let consumption grow out of control, and then you've got to buy new power plants. You've got to build new power lines. You've got to upgrade the infrastructure you've already got, or you can strategically invest in energy saving measures that are cost effective and that meet a rigorous cost benefits test, and you can avoid having to build all of that new expensive infrastructure.
Give me an example of one of those, Sam. Give me an example of those tested, proven energy efficiency.
The perfect example at this point is LED lighting. I mean, you can probably think back, 10 years ago, LED light bulbs were incredibly expensive. They now are almost as cheap as an incandescent bulb. They're a little more expensive, and the quality of them has improved dramatically. I remember the first LED light bulb I installed died after a couple months. Now the ones I have in my house have been in there for 5 years, and there's not even a flicker, right? So LED light bulbs burn just a fraction of the energy of an incandescent bulb, and swapping those out it's a no-brainer at this point, because the technology has gotten just so much better, so much cheaper, and so lighting retrofits are frankly, they're the lowest hanging fruit on the grid today.
Yep.
But there's lots of other ones. I mean, anyone who's got a house that's heated by baseboard electric heaters, you can put in a heat pump on that house, and what's a heat pump is essentially, I like to say it's a fridge in reverse, right? So it's an air conditioner that, instead of blowing the heat out of your house, it's blowing the heat from the outside air into your house. And those heat pumps, they run between, at cold temperatures, they're twice the efficiency of a baseboard electric heater. At warmer temperatures, they can be as much as 4 times the efficiency of a baseboard electric heater. So upgrading a house to any of these does the exact same work for 4 times less electricity, right? And so these are measures that have an incredible cost benefit ratio. So the New Hampshire Saves program just put out their report for the 2018 to 2020 3-year plan, and they found that for every dollar invested, they saved $3.27 or $3.37. So it's the analogy I get from the utility folks is like, it's like going to the store and paying $1 and getting a coupon for $3.37, right? So why wouldn't you do that? And frankly, that's why even Governor Sununu's 2018 update to the 10-year energy strategy spotlighted energy efficiency as the main policy priority of his administration. And so this is why it makes absolutely no sense that on November the 12th, his public utility commissioners decided that they wanted to completely dismantle the energy efficiency resource standard. And that is why our organization is going to be going completely, pulling out absolutely all the stops to make sure that order is not allowed to enter into effect. And frankly, I have been hearing from more lawmakers on both sides of the aisle about this issue in the past 2 weeks than I ever expected to hear. And I do not anticipate that this order will be allowed to persist. But just to sort of get off my to take a step back here, this really is what happens when you appoint folks to what is supposed to be a role in which they are expert, and they're the ones who are weighing evidence. When you appoint folks who really have no background in energy, which I think is what has happened here, is that we had 2 public utilities commissioners who had no background in energy trying to make decisions that they genuinely did not understand.
Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right about that, Sam. And I'm certainly hopeful. I think it's inevitable if this order is not withdrawn. The first step you do, if you have a PUC order, or just like a Superior Court judgment, you don't like it, you file your notice of appeal. In the case of administrative agency, which the PUC is, you have to file a notice for rehearing. That will not be frivolous here because this order was decided by just 2 commissioners when there normally is 3. There was a vacancy. And one of the commissioners signed this order has since resigned. And it's just appalling what they did to our efforts to have energy efficiency
Bob,
advance.
you're describing chaos. I mean, we have vacant positions, and then
We
people
have vacant
resigning.
positions and unqualified people, and it's a disgrace, and there's no question about it. And I'm so glad that people like Clean Energy, led by Sam Evans-Brown, and our consumer advocate, the excellent Don Crease, are committed to going forward to try and change this. And I must say, I think there's going to be an awful lot of support for that position. Because you may not want the windmill in the ridge behind your house. You may not want a big solar array, but if we can't maximize the effectiveness of the kilowatts we're already getting from our existing system, that's a bad result. It's a bad result in every way, in terms of combating climate, in terms of economics, in terms of job creation. Because there's a big industry of people that are busy weatherizing people's homes. A lot of them very low-income people.
And again, that's local work. You can't outsource that
you
to
can't
a national
outsource
company.
that. And it's now these people are laying off people and not sure they'll be able to continue because the energy efficiency funding. Energy efficiency is the lowest cost opportunity we have to improve things, but it isn't cost-free. We have to pay the upfront cost, and then you get a good return. Pretty
Return
fast.
on investment. How
And
many
the
times have we
return
talked about that?
Goes on year after year after year. So, Sam, it's been wonderful to have you with us. We're getting to the end. I'd like you to talk about how you think people should help, how people can help Clean Energy New Hampshire achieve its mission, and what do you see happening going forward? It's really
And you get a whole 90 seconds for that, Sam. So go.
Well, so we are a nonprofit and we are a member organization. So if you at all are taken with what you've heard today, I encourage you to head over to cleanenergynh.org and you can find out there what it takes to become a member and the benefits that are entailed. And that includes the fact that if you are so inclined, in particular if you have a business, we have a weekly policy call for members in which we will give you the nitty-gritty of everything that's happening on New Hampshire energy policy all throughout the legislative session. But also, I mean, just follow us, follow what we're putting out into the world, and amplify it. Tell folks what's up and how they can help on all these issues that frankly don't get enough attention. I mean, like Bob, you know this, that a New Hampshire legislator who gets 10 letters on an issue will say that his inbox is overflowing. So it doesn't take a whole heck of a lot of attention.
As a legislator, you get 3 handwritten letters. That's like a landslide. Exactly.
So pay attention to what's happening locally because it really can make a difference.
Yeah. Sam, it's been wonderful to have you join us. I hope next time you'll be able to do it in person, but this has worked fine. And we're so glad that you're at the helm of Clean Energy New Hampshire because it's an invaluable organization. I hope people will go to their website and decide to become members and support this organization. It's never been more critical that this organization have the resources to carry out its mission than it is right now. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Sam. And have
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Have a great Thanksgiving. I'll be back next week with Lou D'Alessandro because Mike will be a Hibernian.
I'm always a Hibernian. See you later, folks.